The thoracic cage is actually pretty simple, despite there being a lot of bones. Right, a lot of the bones are just ribs here. Right. So first off, we have the sternum. The sternum is actually 3 bones in one. The most superior part of the sternum is the manubrium. The middle part is the body. This is the largest part of our sternum. And then the last part kind of dangles off inferiorly, and that's called the xiphoid process. It's a very odd name. It's a very odd bone, though. Most of us are probably not elderly, I would assume. I could be wrong. And so our xiphoid processes are actually not necessarily going to be mostly made up of bone tissue. In most of us, this bone is probably going to be made up more of cartilage than anything else. You can feel this bone, right? You can kind of push in on it even a little bit. It flexes back and forth because it's made up of cartilage, mostly. As you age, the cartilage is replaced with bone, and it becomes a little bit harder, more ossified. Somebody's asking if this bone can break during CPR compressions. Usually when I think of bones breaking from CPR, we're talking about the ribs. Usually ribs 2, 3, or 4 will end up breaking from CPR. Maybe the 5th one as well. Yeah, but usually the left side bones. The left, so this guy, maybe that guy. Somebody's saying if they break, they're pushing way too hard. Yeah, probably. I'd rather somebody be pushing too hard than not hard enough in that case, though, I guess. But yeah, it's very possible to break bones during CPR. Now, over here on the left-hand side of our screen, we have the various ribs. So on each side, there are 12 ribs, and there are different categories for the ribs. So the first 7 ribs we call true ribs, right? And this is kind of like an elitist way of looking at the ribs, right? The first 7 are true, and then 8 through 12, the last 5 are false ribs, right? It's very elitist. But the designation is not arbitrary. It comes from the idea of whether or not the cartilage that is attached to these ribs directly attaches to the sternum or not. All right, so I'll go ahead and number the true ribs, and we'll take a look at how their cartilage is behaving. Okay, so there we have the 7. So each of these have a bar of cartilage that directly connects to the sternum. When you get to rib 7, it still has its own bar of cartilage that extends to the sternum, and then it's also attached to the next bar of cartilage. Same thing with the 7th, right? You can sort of directly trace from the bone along the cartilage to the sternum, okay? But as soon as you get to the 8th, we venture into the false ribs. Okay. And at this point, the cartilage does not directly attach to the ribs anymore. So if we take this 8th ribs cartilage and we draw it up, it has to piggyback on the previous ribs cartilage in order to get to the sternum. And so that's sort of where we draw the line, right? We're no longer calling you a true rib, right? And this is the case for the rest of these. And then we have 11 and 12 that just don't have any cartilage at all. And so we call these, in addition to being false ribs, we call them floating ribs. Okay, so it's an additional classification on top of, I should use a different color than purple. On top of being a false rib, they are also floating ribs. Okay. Somebody's asking, why do we have floating ribs? They probably offer some sort of protection, but I'm not entirely sure. Part of a thoracotomy. I don't know how to pronounce that word actually now I'm thinking about it. A couple of weeks back. Sorry, say it again. Thoracotomy. A couple of weeks ago, so you got to see all of the ribs. Wow. That'd be kind of interesting, but also probably pretty nasty. I've only seen them in a cadaver, and they're not like super pretty by any means. All right, so any questions about the thoracic cage here?